When I was 16, my parents left me alone for a weekend while they went on a trip. I live at 47 Elm Street, a quiet suburban neighborhood where everyone knows each other, or at least we think we do. On Friday night, I had a few friends over. We watched movies, played video games, and laughed late into the night. It was fun, but by Saturday afternoon, everyone had gone home, leaving me alone in the house. That evening, I was in my room playing video games, trying to beat a particularly tough level. The sound of the storm outside added an extra layer of tension, with rain pelting the windows and thunder rumbling in the distance. I was so engrossed in my game that I almost didn't notice the movement outside my window. A flicker of motion caught my eye, and I paused the game, my heart skipping a beat. I walked over to the window and peeked through the blinds. Standing in his yard, staring directly at my window, was my neighbor, Mr. Wilson. He was a peculiar man, always keeping to himself, but this was the first time he had ever done something so unsettling. He was just standing there, motionless, with a blank expression on his face. I tried to ignore it and went back to my game, but the feeling of being watched was hard to shake. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see him standing there, but the window remained empty. About an hour later, just as I was starting to relax, I heard a tapping sound on my window. My stomach churned, and I slowly turned to face the window. There he was again, but this time he was right outside, his face pressed against the glass, grinning. His smile was eerie, almost predatory. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I jumped up, ran to the window, and locked it. I yanked the curtains shut, my hands trembling. My phone rang, making me jump. It was my friend Lisa, checking in. I took a deep breath and answered, trying to sound calm. "Hey Lisa, what's up?" "Hey Jake, just wanted to see if everything's okay. You sounded a bit off earlier." I hesitated, then blurted out, "It's Mr. Wilson. He's been acting really creepy. He was staring at my window, and then he was right outside, grinning at me." "Jake, that's really creepy. You need to call the police," Lisa insisted. I hesitated again. I didn't want to overreact, but I also didn't want to take any chances. "I don't know, Lisa. What if it's nothing?" "It's not nothing. Call the police, Jake. Better safe than sorry." Reluctantly, I dialed 911 and explained the situation to the operator. They assured me that officers were on their way and to stay inside. I hung up, my heart still racing. I tried to distract myself by turning on the TV, but every noise made me jump. When the police arrived, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. 2 officers knocked on the door, and I let them in, explaining everything that had happened. They took my statement and then went next door to Mr. Wilson's house. I watched from the window, my stomach in knots. After what felt like an eternity, the officers came back. "Mr. Wilson is gone," one of them said. "But we searched his house and found something disturbing." "What did you find?" I asked, dreading the answer. The officer hesitated, then said, "We found pictures of you, Jake, taken from various angles around your home. It looks like he had been watching you for some time." I felt sick. The thought of Mr. Wilson stalking me, watching me, was terrifying. "What's going to happen now?" I asked. "We've put out a warrant for his arrest. We'll do everything we can to find him. In the meantime, you should stay with someone. Don't be alone." I nodded, feeling numb. I called Lisa back and told her what had happened. She insisted I come over to her house, and I agreed. I packed a bag and left the house, locking every door and window before I left. That night I stayed at Lisa's house, too scared to be alone. We didn't get much sleep, but having someone with me made me feel a little safer. The police continued their search for Mr. Wilson, but days turned into weeks, and he was still at large. The experience left a lasting impact on me. I used to feel safe in my home, but now I was constantly on edge. Every creak of the house, every shadow outside made my heart race. My parents installed a security system, and I started carrying my phone with me. Months later, the police finally caught Mr. Wilson. He had been hiding out in a nearby town, planning his next move. He was charged with stalking and breaking and entering, among other things. Knowing he was behind bars brought some relief, but the fear never fully. That weekend when I was 16 taught me a valuable lesson about trust and safety. I realized that even in a quiet suburban neighborhood, danger can lurk in unexpected places. I became more cautious, more aware of my surroundings, and I never took my safety for granted again. My name is Lura, and I'm 17 years old. I live at Maple Street, in a quiet suburban neighborhood where nothing exciting ever happens. Or so I thought. Last weekend, my parents went out of town for a wedding, leaving me home alone. It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend of movies and junk food, but it turned into the most terrifying experience of my life. It was a typical Friday night, and I was cozied up on the couch in the living room, watching a horror movie marathon. The house was eerily quiet, with only the occasional creak of the old wood floors to keep me company. Around 11 p.m., just as the hero of the movie was about to confront the killer, I heard a faint noise coming from the basement. At first, I brushed it off as the house settling. After all, our house was old, and it made weird noises all the time. But then I heard it again, a little louder this time. It sounded like a faint scraping or shuffling. I paused the movie and sat still, straining to hear. The noise continued, and it was definitely coming from the basement. Curiosity got the better of me, and despite the nagging feeling of dread, I decided to investigate. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and cautiously made my way to the basement door. The stairs creaked under my weight as I descended into the darkness. The air grew colder with each step, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. The basement was a cluttered mess of old furniture, cardboard boxes, and forgotten knickknacks. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, casting eerie shadows on the walls. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I heard what sounded like footsteps coming from the far corner of the basement. My pulse quickened, and I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. Slowly, I pointed the flashlight in the direction of the sound. My hands were shaking, making the light dance around the room. And then I saw it, a shadowy figure standing behind an old wardrobe. My breath caught in my throat, and I froze, unable to move or make a sound. Slowly, the figure slowly stepped out into the light, revealing a disheveled man with wild, bloodshot eyes and filthy clothes. His hair was matted, and he looked like he hadn't bathed in weeks. He must have been living down there for days, maybe even weeks. I wanted to scream, but fear had paralyzed me. Finally, my instincts kicked in, and I let out a blood-curdling scream. I turned and bolted up the stairs, my feet barely touching the steps. I slammed the basement door shut behind me and locked it, my hands trembling uncontrollably. I grabbed my phone from the coffee table and dialed 911, my voice shaking as I explained the situation to the operator. Finally, within minutes, the police arrived, their sirens piercing the quiet night. I unlocked the front door and let them in, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. They quickly made their way to the basement, guns drawn. I stood in the living room, my heart still racing, as I listened to the sounds of their search. Within minutes, after what felt like an eternity, one of the officers came back up, leading the disheveled man in handcuffs. He had been hiding behind the old wardrobe, armed with a knife. The officer explained that the man had been planning to attack me, but thankfully, they had arrived before he could do any harm. The police took my statement and assured me that I was safe now. They told me that the man was a drifter who had broken into several homes in the area, looking for places to hide. He had likely entered our basement through a small window that we rarely checked. As the police escorted the man out of the house, I finally allowed myself to breathe. The nightmare was over, but I knew I would never feel completely safe in my home again. My parents came home the next morning, and I told them everything. They were horrified and immediately had all the locks changed and the basement window reinforced. That weekend changed me. I learned that even in the quietest, safest neighborhoods, danger can lurk in the shadows. I'll never forget the sight of that man's wild eyes or the sound of his footsteps in the basement. and I'll always be grateful for the police who arrived just in time to save me from what could have been a tragic end. When I was 16 years old, I lived at Birchwood Avenue in a small town where everyone knew each other. Last Saturday night, my parents went to a friend's party, leaving me home alone. It was supposed to be a quiet evening, but it turned into the scariest night of my life. The storm had been raging for hours, and by 9 p.m. the power went out. I lit some candles and settled down in the living room with a book, trying to ignore the howling wind and pounding rain. The flickering candlelight cast eerie shadows on the walls, making the house feel even more deserted. I tried to focus on my book, but the storm outside was making it difficult. Around 10 p.m., just as I was getting absorbed in the story, I heard a loud banging noise coming from the front door. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze, listening intently. The banging continued, louder and more insistent. I thought it might be my parents coming home early, so I cautiously approached the door. I peered through the peephole and saw a man in a raincoat, his face obscured by the hood. He knocked again, this time with more force. I asked who it was, but he didn't respond. Instead, he started jiggling the doorknob, trying to get in. My blood ran cold, and a wave of fear washed over me. Terrified, I ran to the kitchen and grabbed the largest knife I could find. I hid behind the kitchen counter, my hands trembling as I clutched the knife. The man continued to pound on the door, each bang echoing through the house. Suddenly, the banging stopped, and everything went eerily silent. I held my breath, straining to hear any sound. Just when I thought he had left, I heard the sound of glass shattering from the back of the house. He had found another way in. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode. I dialed 911, whispering my situation to the operator. The dispatcher assured me that officers were on their way, but I couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom. I could hear the man's footsteps getting closer, the floor creaking under his weight. He was moving slowly, methodically, as if searching for something or someone. I crouched behind the counter, praying he wouldn't find me. The footsteps stopped, and I could hear him breathing just on the other side of the kitchen door. Time seemed to stretch on forever. Every second felt like an eternity. Then I heard the sound of sirens in the distance. The man must have heard them too, because he suddenly turned and bolted toward the back of the house. I stayed hidden, too scared to move, until I heard the police shouting outside. I slowly stood up and made my way to the front door, still clutching the knife. The police had arrived, their flashing lights illuminating the dark, stormy night. I opened the door and was met by a stern-looking officer who quickly ushered me outside to safety. They searched the house and the surrounding area and found the man hiding in the backyard, still holding the crowbar he had used to break the window. He was arrested, and the police took my statement. They told me that the man was likely a drifter who had been breaking into homes in the area, looking for valuables to steal. I never found out what his intentions were that night, but the thought of what could have happened still haunts me. My parents came home shortly after, having been notified by the police. They were horrified and immediately checked the entire house to make sure everything was secure. We had the broken window boarded up, and my dad promised to install a security system as soon as possible. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the man's shadowy figure and heard the shattering glass. The storm had passed, but the fear lingered. The next day, my parents reinforced all the doors and windows, and we got a big barking dog named Max to keep us company. The experience changed me. I used to feel safe and secure in our quiet little town, but now I realize that danger can strike anywhere, anytime. I'm more cautious now, always making sure the doors are locked and the windows are secure. And I always keep my phone within reach, just in case. That stormy night taught me a valuable lesson about vigilance and preparedness. It's a night I'll never forget. A night that reminded me that even in the safety of our own homes, we must always be on guard. The police told us that the man they arrested was wanted for several break-ins in nearby towns. He had a history of violence, and they were relieved to have him off the streets. Knowing this didn't make it any easier to sleep that night, or the nights that followed. Over the next few weeks, I tried to return to normal life, but the fear was always there, lurking in the back of my mind. Every time a storm rolled in or the power flickered, my heart would race, and I'd feel the panic rising. My parents were supportive, and having Max around helped a lot, but it took a long time for me to feel even remotely safe again. Looking back, I realize how lucky I was. The police arrived just in time, and the man didn't get the chance to harm me. But that night left a lasting impact on me. It was a harsh reminder that danger can strike when you least expect it, and that you always need to be prepared for the unexpected.